Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Sunday school lesson for today. Normally, in these past few months, we've been doing lessons on Old Testament characters, but this week we're going to move to the New Testament. We're actually doing a character. We're discussing a character in the book of John, who doesn't have a name specifically, but she's a woman who's been caught in the act of adultery, which is a sin in the eyes of God. And so, in a complex society, I'm reading from our book, Carolyn Nystrom's New Testament Characters. In a complex society, some people just don't make it. They are mentally ill, or low in intelligence, or uneducated, or socially inept, or lacking self-confidence, or physically disabled, or stuck in various forms of addictions. Whatever the cause, they can't cope. Capable people move around them, rushing off to work or school or church. But those throwaway people hover at the edges of society, largely unnoticed and undervalued by their busy counterparts. So, what I want you to think about while I'm reading this lesson is, what kinds of people do we tend to throw away? So, think of some people who seem unnoticed or undervalued in society, in our modern society. And so, in that, what I also want you to do is ask yourself, why do you avoid these people? Are you refusing because you know you can't solve their problems? Are you protecting yourself? And, how could you show that you value these people in the same way that you hope that God values you? In all of his relationships, Jesus showed a different value system from that of the society in which he lived. And we're going to go to the story. This is John chapter 8, verses 1 through 11. You can follow along in your own Bible or your own Bible app. The YouVersion app is amazing. That's what I use. It's a pretty good one. But I'm using my Bible right now. This is the New International Version. And this is right after the Festival of the Tabernacles and, feeding the 5,000. And this is kind of in different areas. So, then they all went home. This is the Pharisees. Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. At dawn, he appeared again in the temple courts, where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now, what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. The Pharisees were the people who followed the law to the T. And so Jesus coming along saying, you don't have to follow the laws to the T, just kind of follow my basic laws and you'll be okay, didn't really make them happy. So they're looking for a way to catch him in a lie so that they could essentially say, why listen to this guy? He's fake. He doesn't know. So, but Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. So they're asking him this question, and what does he start doing? He starts writing on the ground with the finger. He's doodling. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let any of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. So the Pharisees, bring up this woman who's committed adultery. They're trying to get Jesus to kind of, they want to catch him in a trap so that they can discredit him. And what does he start doing? He just starts drawing and thinking, and they continue to question him. And what does he do? He goes, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." And it goes back to doodling. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left, with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" No one, sir, she said. Then neither do I condemn you, Jesus declared. Now go and leave your life of sin. So, Jewish law required that she be stoned to death. If Jesus had told them to stone her, they could have brought Jesus before the Roman authorities. The Romans did not allow the Jews to implement their own death sentences. So they were trying to get Jesus to say, yes, stone her. If he said yes, stone her, they could take him before the Romans and say he's trying to follow our laws and our Levitical laws and get him in trouble. Yeah, if Jesus had granted the woman a pardon, if he had said, no, we don't do it, the Pharisees could have claimed that he was a false prophet for ignoring God's law. Jesus wisely escaped the trap by showing the Pharisees that they had no grounds for judging, since they too were sinful. So, Jesus then told the woman to go and leave her life of sin. Jesus did not ignore the sin, but he forgave her and gave her a new start in life. Jesus does the same for us when we turn to him. And so, if you see this, the Pharisees, law-abiding people, wanted Jesus to say one of two things. Said, yes, you can stone her, because the law says you can. If he said that, they could go to the Romans and say, hey, this guy is telling us to follow our laws concerning death sentences, and he would get in trouble with the Romans. If he said, no, don't do it, don't stone her, they could be like, well, this guy's saying he's not following God's law, therefore he must be a false prophet, and you should listen to him. So what does Jesus do? He finds a way to turn the tables on them. Make them go, wait, I'm doing something, I have sin, and so I have sin, she has a sin. If I have no sin, then I should be able to punish her the way that I would be punished for breaking a Levitical law. But if I stone her, then I'm technically breaking a Levitical law, and I can technically, it kind of creates a circle. And that's why so many of them left. They realized they couldn't technically win. They couldn't technically beat Jesus at his own. Can't really say game, can we? So, there we go. So, in the Scarlet Letter, which some of you may read in the next couple of years, there's a woman named Hester Prynne, and she commits the sin of adultery, and she's actually required to wear a letter A to let fellow townspeople know of her sin. But in this story, the public condemnation for adultery goes far beyond a small letter A. You gotta hand it to the Pharisees. They were tough on sin. At least they were tough on sins committed by other people. That's what comes on later in the lesson. In this case, the target was a woman who had been caught in the act of adultery. The Pharisees brought the woman before Jesus and demanded that the penalty dictated by the Jewish law, be carried out, which was death by stoning. The stage was set for another showdown in the ongoing series of encounters between Jesus and the religious leaders. As usual, Jesus rose to the challenge, telling the Pharisees that they could go ahead and stone the woman. But there was a catch. This is why sometimes I think Jesus would be a very good lawyer. He says, you can do one thing, but there's a catch. He's out-lawyering the lawyers. Jesus said the first stone should be thrown by those among the woman's accusers who had never sinned, which spoiled the party. All the righteous indignation and mob emotion that had been growing to a fever pitch was punctured by one simple statement. Now, the woman's accuser, the Pharisees, left without throwing a single stone. Now that the accusers has been dealt with, Jesus turned to the woman herself, who was probably fearing for her life because, she's been put in front of a bunch of people for the sin of adultery, and these people go to this one guy and say, hey, you choose whether she lives or dies. He was well aware of her sins, but he looked beyond her actions to her heart. which was hungry for salvation. He forgave the woman, commanding her to leave her life of sin. It is important for us personally to be constantly on the lookout for sin in our own hearts, and we should gently point out sins that are evident in the lives of others. But in pursuing our own self-righteousness, we need to remember grace and forgiveness, because if we don't, we can wind up as self-aggrandizing as the Pharisees. So, in this, sorry guys, most of us have had at least one occasion when we felt like we were being treated like trash. And what effect does this kind of experience have on you personally? For me, it does make me feel kind of shamed. It kind of makes me feel worried that, about what's going to happen to me. Much like this woman. And the Levitical law that they're actually following, it says, if a man commits adultery with another man's wife, or with the wife of his neighbor, both the adulterer and the adulteress must be put to death. See, that's the interesting thing. They didn't bring forth the adulterer. They just brought forth the adulteress. They didn't bring forth the husband, but they brought forth the woman that was committing adultery, which creates a very interesting thing. Where was the husband? Could the husband been one of the Pharisees that were in that group? We don't know. But in the view of that law, why do you think that they brought the woman but not the man? Did they bring the woman just because they were planning on catching Jesus in this trap? Or did they not bring the man because maybe the man was dead? Maybe the man had already been stoned. Or maybe the man was one of the Pharisees that was hiding in amongst the crowd in order to trap Jesus. And so, what underlying problems were not being addressed by the accusations against the woman? The accusations against the woman were very simple. She committed adultery. She should die. But what other underlying questions were there? And so, we're going back to the throwawayness in this. So, how did Christ's actions show that the woman was not a throwaway person in his sight? So, what Christ did was he said, let those who are without sin cast the first stone, and he also forgave her. So, in that occasion, how does that show that she was not a throwaway person in his eyes? Interesting. And in that case, we should also pay attention to how the other people treated her once they realized that there was no case. So, in what he did, he showed that he valued the woman even though the temple leaders didn't. And so what words and actions help you to feel valued? Put that in the comments below. Tell me what things can people do that make you feel valued, that make you feel like people can take care of you, care about you. And in that, also, what difference does it make to you that Christ values you no matter what you've done? Christ still values us even though we have sinned. And we have all sinned. We have all sinned and fallen short of God's grace. But God still loves us. So what we need to ask ourselves is, how does that make us feel? And so, many people are almost faceless to us. We see them only for what they can do for us. We avoid other people because their problems are too big for us to fix because they embarrass us. Think of some of the throwaway people who enter our life. We've got that kind of going on right now. We've got some throwaway people. We've got the people who are in our life that we don't really haven't paid attention to. Kind of we move around them because we can't deal with them, and so we're at that kind of that stage where we need to pay attention to those, and we need to ask ourselves, how can we treat these people in a way that mirrors Christ? Okay, so I'm going to read a couple of verses, and then we're going to close in prayer for the day. And I just want you to go out into the world this week and remember that Jesus takes care of the throwaway people. And how can we take care of those people that are on the marginalized fringes of society? So, going back to John, going back to where we were. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." Please bow your heads with me. Lord, I just want to thank you for this day, for the wonderful weather we have, and for our ability to come together in Christian worship and community. I pray that as we go out into the world, from either in person or in the comforts of our own home, that we remember that your grace is a wonderful thing, and that when we are feeling bad and we feel like we have caused shame because of the way other people are treating us, that we can always depend on you to give us our grace and forgiveness. And I pray that when we feel like a person is doing wrong and should be punished, that we remember that we are not without sin, that we have messed up just as much as that person has in the eyes of another person, and so that we do not use our knowledge to make other people feel less of a person. Lord, I pray that you watch over all of us, keep us healthy, keep us strong, and help us to remember that in you there is grace and forgiveness and peace. Amen.